Welcome back to a UIPlanner training course. We are going to cover today a little topic about calculations. We're not going to go into depth about how to make changes to the calculations, but I just want you to be familiar with where they are and why it is useful to you as a person that might be viewing information in the model. Now here we start with the planning model as it has already compiled and run. And so we have all the reports they've run, and there's numbers, results in these reports. Now, one of the things that we can do that we showed in a previous video is that you can browse a report. Now you can go to a depreciation report, you can browse it, for example, and you can see these numbers right here. Remember last time we showed you how that you can look at all the lines, or you can just look at all the ones without them being hidden, the entities, the time across. And this is very useful, and you can then go and drill down. You can see, okay, where the numbers came from. For example, let's look at this one down here. So we can see we'll just look at ending non-depreciable plant balance. I'm just doing this for simplicity's sake, but there's probably more complicated calculations than this. So if I wanted to see how this 218 was derived, I could really figure it out by simply just drilling down here. I could look at it. Oh wait, this one's an actual, so that's not a good example. I'm sorry. So let's go to a forecast period, because forecast periods are calculated typically in actual months or just actual numbers. But here we have a calculation. Here you can see it's adding up all of these lines in order to get there. But this is only one way to view this kind of information, right? You know that it's summing up somewhere these lines like this one, this one, this one, all of these lines all the way down from here to there. And you can see that there was no numbers to add in between, and so it just basically took the previous balance, put it here, sum down, and just kept repeating that. But you don't really see that as much. So like here, for example, you can see previous. So it's pulling that line from the prior June balance. So you can like use the browser report to mostly see these calculations. But what if it's a really complex calculation? It's really kind of hard to follow. It's really hard to see this, just by just clicking around and seeing that. Well, one way that you can do that is by simply going to this report. You can right click it and go to view calculation. Now the difference between edit calculation and view calculation should be fairly obvious. The edit calculation is when you want to actually edit the report and make changes to it, add lines, change the formula, etc. And view calculation is just simply you just want to view it. You don't want to make any formula changes, and you just want to just see how it's working right now. The other thing too is that when you click on edit calculation, it typically takes a little bit longer for the menu to pop open. View calculation is a little bit faster. So if you're trying to look for speed, just want to just look at it really fast, always pick view calculation. So then this menu will pop up. It doesn't always look exactly like this. Sometimes these menu items will be invisible, and we can go through these another time, or if you have questions, because you probably won't be able to go through every single one of these and what they do. This is mainly for those that want to edit the formulas in here. So this may not even be relevant to you. So I wouldn't really worry about it per se, of this information being here. Obviously it tells you what report you're in. You can also change this if you want within this screen. Also tells you what entity that you're rolling over. And the reason why that's important is because if you have this column called local context, and if the model has ran and this report has results in it, then you will be able to see the numbers in this column for each period. You only can look at one period at a time, so like 1 month at a time in this case. And you can change the period that you want to look at. And some other information that's kind of useful to you, so you can modify these columns. So like you have like, this is used mainly, this is a reference, this is mainly used when you want to make changes to the model. This is the reference column, the line label, what you see when you were browsing. This is the formula that it does when it's in the forecast period, why it's called formula forecast. And then there's a formula actual column, which is what it does when it is in actuals period. Then this is the posting, if it has one. As you can see, when it's gray like this, there is no posting. Here you can see this one is posting right here. So we have a posting here that tells the model where this information should go onto the ledger. And for these depreciable additions, it probably has some kind of posting to the balance sheet. And it's increasing plant. And there's always in the model, there's always a debit and a credit. So we can look at that real quick. That's one of the things that you can't see from the browser report is that you can't always see what the debit and credit is just from the report. You have to go to like where the information is going to, like the balance sheet report, which we can show you here in a little bit. But we can see here that this is the line. And when you're in the balance sheet and you find the line where this was going, like in property, plant, and equipment, you will see this line. It'll show you the reference and the line label and the report where it came from. But sometimes it's useful to come here to see exactly the debit and credit. There's actually this button that you can click on. Now this one's okay to click on when you're in the view calculation mode, so don't worry. And here you can see on that line, total depreciable additions, we're debiting property, plant, and equipment, and then we're crediting construction in progress. Now there's these other items that we use. We don't usually use the intercompany accruals and cash, but if there was like a lag, or like if it was similar to accounts receivable or accounts payable, where like only a portion of that revenue, for example, we're going to receive, so some of it goes into accounts receivable, then we would use this second column, the second row right here. And obviously you can see it's not lagged. It's not like an accounts receivable or an accounts payable account. So that's why there's only a debit and a credit and not a second journal entry for this particular line. Sometimes there is a indirect cash flow override. So sometimes we have an indirect cash flow mapping that basically tells the model how to map certain things based off of what the debit and credit is, because either it's going to the both to the balance sheet of debit and credit, or an income statement debit or credit, and then an opposing entry to the balance sheet. But it never posts it directly to the cash flow statement, except for cash. That's the only that's the only entry that you can make in these lines to the cash flow statement. If you want to get things to, and that's the direct cash, you can't make postings here to the indirect cash flow. You have to. That's based off of a mapping that we can show maybe in another training video if it's necessary. But essentially, if we don't like that mapping, we can then change this mapping to like a different posting within the model. You can see here we have different ones, and we can override it. I can't remember exactly how the model is mapping these exactly. Obviously, this is not a cash item. This is a balance sheet account, and that's a balance sheet account. So there's probably no indirect cash flow, right? So you don't have to worry about that. But in the case that there was a situation where we have a cash item here, or something that we're trying to back out in the indirect cash flow statement, then we would have something here possibly if we didn't like how it was being posted to the indirect cash flow statement. Now you can see if we go to that line that we were just talking about a little bit ago. So let's go down to this non-depreciable plant balance. Here you can actually see the formula. You can see here it says sum down from BH to here. So it will literally sum this row or this line all the way down to here. it also has another parameter in there where it says skip embedded sumdowns. So you notice that between BH and BT that there's another sumdown, which happens to be this one right here. So what's happening is that the formula is telling it to ignore this sumdown. So it's not going to, if there was a number here, it would not add it to that. And the reason why this one's important, oh, there's another sumdown right there too. The reason why that's important or that's useful is because now we can have like these subtotals, which you can see these are subtotals essentially. Non-depreciable additions and then non-depreciable retirements, and that way we get our total plant change from the prior balance to the ending balance for that period. So that's a very useful function, sum down, and then setting the parameter to skip embedded sum downs. Now, in some cases we may not want to skip embedded sum downs, but most of the time you do. Sometimes you'll also notice that the formulas are also in the format actual. This is not always necessary. You don't need to repeat a formula into the actual column. You only need to put formulas. In this case, we did for some reason, but you don't have to because the model already assumes that if you have a formula here and if you don't have one here, then it just assumes that it's the same. When you want to put a formula in the formula actual is when you want to do something that is different than the formula forecast column. In this case, like for example here, we have a sum down to find the ending plant balance after calculating all the changes from the prior balance to the new changes for that month, and that gets us our new balance. But sometimes we don't want to do that calculation. We want to just know what the exact number is. In this case, we have an input formula which overrides this sum down function when we're in an actuals period, and it grabs from our base actuals case what that number is for that period that we have defined that we want to use actuals for. Another useful column here is next to the local context is sometimes you'll see this thing called visibility. You may not always see this, but sometimes it helps you to see, okay, well, which lines are being hidden, which ones are not, which are being suppressed if all 0, because sometimes certain lines won't show up because we have this parameter set so that if the lines, basically all numbers from the beginning of the model to the very end, to like in this case this model runs to 2027, if all those numbers on this whole line were 0, then it will suppress it, meaning that it will just it'll hide it when you browse it. If there is just one period, just 1 month that has a number, it will make the whole line visible. So that's basically the purpose of this suppress if all 0. Otherwise, we have like another one where it just says always show. In that case, if regardless if the whole line numbers are 0, it'll still show the line. Now you can change this menu setting, so you can see we have several different columns here. You can change this setting by simply clicking on this black C button, and you can see that it brings up this dialog box that has some items that you can select. You can see there's quite a lot that you can select. Most of these you will not need to use, and the ones at the top are typically the ones that you will use the most often. Some of the other ones that you might want to see is like the month to annual code, the annual to month, and the line usage. And I'll show you that here in a second. So we'll just unclick these ones so we have more room in our report. That's the other thing too, is that you can change this, and I believe it'll remember this selection the next time you log into the model. So you can see here we modified the report, so the view of it. So now we have these extra columns, and you can move these columns to the left and to the right to help you be able to view this. And like I said, I believe this will save this next time, so when you log out of the model, and if you didn't go back in this black C and change it, it should remember this last time that you were using it and bring you back to this particular way of viewing it. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to be able to kind of show you a little bit of like what is in these. So here you can see, you'll notice that the line usage is basically telling the model what type of line this is. So is it a formula? Is it a label only? There's also another field, comment, placeholder for entity, placeholder for sub. These two are actually used typically on the very first line, which I'll show you. So you can see here we got one that says placeholder. What that means is that when you browse the report, it's going to just show you the entity. Now there's also another one that says sub entity. And that basically, what that is that if you have a report which has two entity groups that it rolls over, in like the case of like OMAG, where you have two entity groups, a primary and secondary, which is like resource type and utility. So like Nevada Power, Sierra Electric, Sierra Gas, and Sierra Pacific Resources. Then what it happens to have is like two. It has one here, a primary, and then a secondary or a sub is what it's called, a sub entity group. And so when you browse the report, it'll show both of those. This report only has one entity it rolls over, which happens to be the functional plant summary group. So it only needs one. So you typically only see one of those. Now the main ones you'll see is just formula and label only. Label only, typically when you see label only, you'll see actually it'll say label only in the formula forecast column. So you may not even need to see this, because if it says label only, then it's label only. If not, if it's white like this, if it's a white cell, then it's a formula most likely. And then you have this other column for visibility, which we just talked about a little bit, but I just wanted to show that there are three options again. It's always show, always hide, and specify all 0. That's the only options you have. And then we have this other one called month to annual code. We talked about this briefly in another video, but here just want to show you that essentially we have other options of what the model should do with information, that it's looking at it from a 12-month versus an annual. So like, remember when I was talking about how that if we have like numbers that are balances, which we do, we have balances in here. We have an ending depreciable plant balance. We don't want them to sum every single month all the way across and then show that as an annual number. We only want to see the December number in the annual view. So that's the reason why we have to set those to ending balance. Just as the same as if we're looking at something that's the beginning balance, we don't want to see the number from December. We want to see the number from January if we're looking at it from an annual perspective. That's why we set this one to beginning balance. Now there's some other parameters in here, like there's like peak value. So if you have like 12 months of data, maybe we just want, when we look at it from an annual perspective, we only want to see like the highest value within that month. This might be relevant to those folks in the rate schedule or in the rates department. Maybe they want to see the peak demand number that is in there. And so then we have rolling 12-month total. What that means is that when you look at it from an annual view, it's just going to give you the rolling 12 months total of that number. I believe that is basically the same thing as total sum of months, which I'm not sure why we have that one too, but it pretty much sounds like the same thing to me. I've never used this one. I usually always use this one, total sum of months, and not that one. This other one is called 12-month average. So if you wanted to see the average of the last 12 months in the annual view, then you can pick that one. There's also a 13-month average, which actually, instead of looking at it over 12 months, it's actually looking over 13 months. So December. So December is included twice, or 2 different Decembers are included. There's also a 2-point average, and then there's no annual value. Maybe in some cases that none of those values make any sense no matter which way you put it, and you just simply want it to be blank whenever you look at it from an annual perspective. That's also a possibility. Now here's another one. As we were talking about earlier, that there is an actuals column for some of these numbers. So like ending non-depreciable plant balance, like we were talking about earlier, it actually has in the formula actuals uh, column, which we're not seeing here, but it's there and it has an input, and we can input information in there. But the reason why we do that is because we have this parameter set to say dollars with actuals. What that means is that it will use the actuals case. If it was set to something like that, these ones are hardly ever used. This one actually is used the most often. Actually, I'm sorry. This one's used the most often. This one's not used very often, and this one's used probably the second most. Although the other thing too is that from this view calculation screen, there's another way you can get to the edit time data. You can also click on this button right here. That will get you to the edit time data screen, which is another way to change data so that you don't have to go back to the exit this and right click it and hit edit time data. This is just another quick way to get there if you prefer. The other thing too is that we can look here at this at some information here, and we can look at, like, let's say this operational non-depreciable additions. We can click on this flashlight. Remember last time we used the flashlight to look up an activity code when we were updating the attributes for a new entity that we created. But a flashlight can also help us look at the dependencies and precedents for a particular line. So this one, we'll hit this button, and it'll be able to tell us, okay, here's where the information is coming from. So that's how the information got into that line. It came from here. Now you'll notice that there's more than one piece of information that's coming into that line, and we'll kind of show that here in a second. But you could have hundreds of information where this line is coming. Typically, it's not that many. Usually, it's because there's a formula in this cell. It's probably saying add this to this to this to this, and add them all together and put it into this line, right? Now, the line also has dependents, so this is telling you where it's going to in the model. So it's going to this functional plant summary, which is it's very similar to the depreciation report, but it does some other things with it for tax purposes. And then it also goes to another line within the same report. So we're in the depreciation report, so it's just telling you where it's also going. But you can see here that it's going down into that line BM, total non-depreciable additions. Now you don't see it here, which is something that's a little hard, but you don't see that it's getting summed down into this BT, because remember that line BT is summing down from BH all the way down. You don't see that here. That's because the sum down is kind of overlaying it. It's kind of summing over it, and so it's not referencing it directly. If it was referencing it directly, like so if we said the sum down, say sum from BI down, then it would be included here in its dependence, right? But it's not. So that's one thing you have to kind of be cautious about, is that even though the dependence doesn't show here, it doesn't necessarily mean that there might be some other information that it depends on, or other places that the information may go. That's where you have to pay attention in these reports to these sum down functions and kind of understand, okay, is it wrapped within a sum down? Now if you go back again, you'll notice that there's another group here at the bottom. Allocations pushes, receive data from, and then allocation pushes, send data to. So sometimes we'll have, for regulatory purposes, we'll have information that's pushed through an allocation to like the RevRec or through to the ROR report. And you'll notice that you'll see something of information show up here if that line is being allocated. can't remember, but I believe, nope, that's not that one. We can try showing another time. We'll do another video on regulatory assets specifically, and just kind of looking at the allocations as well, because that will be kind of important to some of you users that really wanted to understand how information is flowing for regulatory assets and other regulatory adjustments. The other thing too here is that if we go back and we change this back, say change it to local context, posting just like I had before. You also notice that there's formatting in these columns. You see here, this one has percent, this one has commas in it, some spacing in there for you, more percentages right here. Some might not even have any formatting. But the thing is here, you can also format. When we talked about in the browse report, you can also format in the browse report, but you can also format here, and that's through this section right here. The funny thing is about view calculation is that even though you're viewing the calculation, you can still change the attributes, which is not a calculation, it's just formatting. So if your base attribute case is unlocked and you're in the view calculation, you could change these. So you could change it to, like, I want it like that, or I want it like that. That's like, you know, where it's adjusted, if you will. You can change whether it's bold, italicized, underline. There's also some other menu items for those that are in accounting, to like double lines on top and bottom. You can also change the color. See? You can also change numbers to $signs if you so choose. Now there's some presets in here, like there's a percent, dollar, number, date. There's also sometimes numbers are not just dollars and percents and just plain numbers, but they might be an actual date. So there's a date parameter here too. And there's also these other ones, unique ones, like depending on if you want more decimal points than the presets. So like for example, this one has no decimals, I believe. This one has 2 decimals, no decimal. So if you want 2 decimals, you might have to select like this one, and it'll show the negative numbers in red. That's what that means. And then if you don't want red, you can just pick like this one, for example. I'm not entirely sure what the difference between all of these are, and like this one here, it'll add a $sign too. There's some unique ones. You can play with this for a little bit if you need to for the formatting, but here's all the different types of formatting that are available to you. This might be more important to for those folks, again, like in the rates department, if you want to make sure that you can see 5 decimal points for your rates, because your rates go out to 5 decimal places. So that would be important probably to select like this one, for example. You can also take a formula and you can copy it. I mean, not a formula, I'm sorry, formatting, and copy it. So you can take that and copy that formatting here. Make sure you uncheck this box after you're done, or you're going to format a whole bunch of stuff that you don't want to. So you can see here I just formatted copy. You can do it again if you want. Copy that. Done. Format it again. Now another thing too here within this report, I noticed that you see how that you have all these lines where, you remember we were talking about how this line had like 4 things that we're adding together. Well, it kind of carries over quite a bit, and sometimes these formulas can get pretty lengthy, and you know, where it's not within the viewable screen. You can see it up here when you click on it. You can see the formula up here, but even then it could probably roll off into this box, right? And you're like, I can't, it's hard to follow, right? Well, if you don't want to see these name values, because it's basically showing you the reference letter and then the name of that line, and then what it's doing, multiplying this line, and then plus this line, multiply this line. Now if you just want to just simply see the reference, you can hit this this blue button with an I in the middle of it, and it actually will just show you the reference. That's helpful too if you're just trying to see that. Now it doesn't do that for like formulas like sum down, roll with path, copy from, those kind of formulas. It doesn't shrink those ones down. It only does it for ones that are like just using basic operators, adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. It only does it for those. It doesn't do for any other lines, but those are typically the ones that usually take up a lot of this view area right here, this white box. And because sometimes you could have like maybe a dozen things that are added and subtracted or multiplied and divided, and so that's where it might be useful to kind of like click this button so you can kind of narrow it down to like, okay, these are the lines, and then you can kind of just scroll up and you can say, okay, here's R and N, there's R and N right there. So real quick, let me change this back to the formulas that it was before. I'm sorry, not the formulas, the formatting it was before. And that should conclude everything. Oh yeah, the other thing too is that if you don't see this formatting, click this button right here. There's another button here too that removes this top section right here. And then there's this other one that removes that white box. Just so again, this one, and this one. So these might not be viewable when you log into it first. So you might have to click on these boxes in order to kind of see them. I don't usually use this split screen, but you could play with it and see if it works out for you. I don't usually use it because pretty much most of the time I have to see the whole thing anyways. You cannot bring up more than one view calculation screen at a time, so that's probably where the split screen might be helpful, where you can look at the very bottom of the report and then look at the very top of the report simultaneously. Especially if you have a lot of times these reports are created so that the data that it depends on to do its calculations are typically at the very top, and a lot of the calculations that are done are usually done at the bottom, and so it kind of goes kind of in a linear fashion from top down. And so sometimes you might see like numbers right here where you might want to like reference. So like for example like this one, F and I is right here. That was helpful because now I can see it much easier and I didn't have to scroll up and down on both of them. It might be useful to you to kind of help, and then you can take it off if you don't want it. This is very helpful, I guess, if you have a very long report. This report is not super long. Some reports could go a very, very long way, especially like things for like deferred energy and reports that are doing validations, for example, tend to have like lots of rows. So that'll conclude our video for today. Thank you for watching.